Well, we cannot listen to this music. I'm sorry.
You don't hear it?
No. So maybe you can put some words in order to explain things.
Okay, understood.
לא, אותו דבר.
Okay, so let's start. So this short movie just was to give you the impression about the boom of space during the last 15 years. And when we are talking about electro-optical Earth observation, I will mainly concentrate on electro-optics Earth observation. Typically, the first question to be asked is what do the end users want? Personally, I grew up at Elbit Systems where we are not in contact directly with the end user, but rather with the main contractors which build the satellites and provide it to the end user. And the question is, what do the end user want, or what do they think they need? So obviously, the single most important parameter when it comes to EO from space would be the spatial resolution, or the ground sample distance, the GSD. It would be the contrast preservation, the MTF, or how sharp is the image. Obviously, the customers would like a large field of view, so to gather a lot of area covered in each swap of the satellite. Signal to noise ratio is another parameter important for the end customer, because what he wants is to be able to image not only in daylight or not only at noon when the radiometric conditions are optimal, but rather to be able to image and have noiseless images even in lower lighting conditions. For commercial application, and sometimes even for defense application, area coverage rate is a critical parameter, meaning how many spots, how many images can I provide per day or per week. The temporal resolution, the revisit time. So for the old space legacy systems, when we have a single system, a single expensive satellite, this revisit time is typically measured in days. It takes days to visit again a given spot on the Earth. Today, in the new space domain, the revisit time is measured in hours or multi-daily visit time.
כן, הוא מתקשר ולא מדבר, כן.
Okay, can I continue?
Sure, but I cannot see any of your slides.
You cannot see my slides?
No.
ארי, תעשה share למסך שלך.
עשיתי.
לא, למסך, לא למצגת.
אצלי רואים.
The presentation?
לא רואים.
אצלי רואים.
מי זה אצלך?
לא, זו טעות, הוא לא רואה.
תאמין לי שאני רואה.
תאמין לי שאתה לא רואה.
טוב, חברים,
מה לעשות, אני רואה את השקפים.
אתה רואה משהו, זה נכון, אבל לא את המצגת.
אני רואה את המצגת.
טוב.
גם אני רואה את המצגת.
רואים את המצגת?
כן.
אוקיי, אז אני ממשיך. Another parameter is the mission life, which is basically how much time the satellite or the mission will be operational. In the old days, typically old and expensive satellites, the aim was to extend the mission life as much as possible, since these satellites are very expensive and development cycles are very long. So typically measured in 7 to 10 years. And additional requirements came into the game over the last decade. Of course, registration, geolocation, to be able to co-register the image into accurate coordinates on the Earth, reliability, and radiometric accuracy, which means that I'm not just providing image product to visualize the scene, but only can measure physical quantities such as the energy or the reflection from the ground. And this, of course, allows us to do much more than just identify objects and or features, but also to identify materials by their spectral signature, etc. But when we want to design a satellite, an Earth observation satellite, to meet all this long list of requirements, we have a train of constraints, starting from the launcher constraint, the mass it can launch, the envelope, the size, and the environmental conditions that the satellite has to survive during launch, mainly vibrations. We have to keep up with the satellite constraints, mainly the envelope and the mass, but of course the satellite and the payload is also to withstand the environmental conditions of space, whether if it's thermal, radiation. The satellite has to be able to provide the required power for the proper functioning of the payload through the mission life. And of course, the ability to download the huge amounts of data that are gathered or collected on each pass of the satellite. Okay, so typically when we ask a customer what is the resolution that he wants, and typically this is the most important parameter for Earth observation, mainly for defense and government, it will say that the most important parameter is the resolution, and what it really means is the spatial resolution, or what is the, I would say, the smallest feature on ground that it can identify when it looks at the images. But resolution is a multidimensional figure of merit. It has to do with 4 or 5 different axes of resolution. So spatial is the trivial one that we all know and familiar with. But of course, we have also the spectral resolution. Are we imaging panchromatic imaging, black or white? We're imaging RGB, color images, or do we have tens of spectral bands, which allows us to actually identify the spectral signature of the materials and the scene that I'm imaging? We have radiometric resolution, which means, am I imaging or am I providing an image with 10 bits, 11 bits, 12 bits, meaning how rich is the image that I am producing in terms of its gray levels? Of course, the more gray levels, the more bits I have in my system, I can give a more rich image with much more data, and I can simultaneously image in the same scene portions which suffer from very low light conditions in the shadow, for example, and on the other hand, to be able to image portions of the scene which are highly illuminated, but without getting into saturation of those pixels on those illuminated areas. Of course, the swath is very important, the width of the image that I'm imaging. So in typical, I would say, traditional systems, typically the scanning method is push boom with relatively very wide field of view, very wide focal plane arrays covering 10, 12, 15 kilometers. But in the new space, which I will explain and present later on today, we'll see that there are new solutions in the new space providing lower swaths, but still are able to provide reasonable area coverage. And we have the temporal resolution, which is basically how many times I pass over an area of interest. Obviously, if I have a single satellite, it will be very difficult to provide multi-day or more than once to 2 to 3 days coverage. If I have a constellation of satellites, obviously, I can increase this number significantly. So if we look at spatial resolution, we can see a very obvious and clear trade-off starting from the 80s and the 90s until today, with resolutions which are improving and getting improved with each new satellite and with each technology improvement. So if you look at satellite back on the 90s, for example, the French, the Spot 2 or the Landsat providing tens of meters per pixel. Then through the end of the 90s and the beginning of 2000, we had the IKONOS constellation and the Kuiperg, the American Kuiperg, providing the 1 meter and better, 0.63. And basically today, we have satellites providing a resolution, native resolution of 0.3 meter. Of course, one example which is well known, the benchmark of very high resolution satellites is the WorldView fleet, the WorldView 3 of Maxar. So the trend is quite clear. By the way, you can see in this nice graph also the trend in SAR imaging, which is out of the scope of the talk today. But again, you can see that also in SAR and radar imaging, the trend was very clear. And today, let's say, it is not so rare to find SAR systems with resolutions around 1 meter and even better than that. Okay. But when you ask the customer, or typically in each RFI or RFP that you get from a customer for resolution, he typically states the resolution he wants. And then the second question, if you are smart enough, is to ask him what is the actual application you need and not what is the resolution that you want. Because in many cases, spatial resolution is not the most demanding application which drives the complexity and the price of the satellite. It really depends on what you want to do with this satellite or with this constellation. As you can see here in this nice graph, we can see here some division of example applications on 2 or 3 basically dimensions. One is the resolution, which is the horizontal axis, the temporal resolution, meaning what is the required update rate of the data, and the third domain is the spectral resolution, meaning how many spectral bands you need for the application and how many or how narrow this spectral band needs to be. So obviously, when you're going to the left corner, down the left corner of this graph, when you're going to demanding applications such as defense or emergency or intelligence, you will need very high resolution, spatial resolution, better than meter typically. Typically, if it's defense agency, they will require better than 0.5. But on the other hand, for some instances, they will require also a very high temporal resolution. But this really depends if you're doing, for example, infrastructure investigation, or you'd like to revisit dynamic scene where you want to be able to update your data. On the other hand, if you go to the top right corner of this graph, for example, climate change or climate investigation, typically these systems which looks at the atmosphere or sometimes on the Earth itself needs a resolution which is relatively very low, hundreds of meters, sometimes kilometers. And the update time for this data is typically not for weather forecast, but for, let's say, climate investigation. The temporal resolution will typically be measured in days, sometimes tens of days. So basically, it really depends. Agriculture, precision agriculture, in the middle of this graph, you can see, is somewhere in between, where you don't need sub-meter resolution, obviously, in order to be able to extract valuable data from these large area fields and crop fields. But on the other hand, you would like an intermediate revisit time, maybe not several days, several times a day, but you will need to visit these at least, let's say, once a week or once in 2 weeks in order to be able to give to the end user, whether if it's the farmer or any agency using this data, to give him a relevant and updated data. So what this graph actually wants to be is that when you say the resolution I need is something, the good question for you as a developer of a mission provider or system is to ask what is the mission that you need actually, what is the end use, and then to try to point out to the best or the optimal solution. By the way, I mentioned the spectral resolution as another parameter because if, for example, I want to do agriculture, it's good to have many spectral bands, but sometimes with 4 or 6 bands, you will be able to provide a lot of valuable data, for example, on the health or the water content of the crops that you're trying to monitor. On the other hand, if you are trying to do geology and identify real materials and minerals, you will typically need superspectral, sometimes hyperspectral systems with tens or hundreds of spectral bands. And obviously, this will impose a very strong trade-off on the system since you divide the energy into many spectral bands, and then it will come in the expense of whether it's the spatial resolution, the GSD, or the integration time. So basically, there are no free meals with respect to that. So spatial resolution, the single most important parameter, we all know to say that 1 meter is better than 2 and 2 meters is better than 5, but physics is the same physics. So diffraction is the main physical phenomena which will limit the ability to resolve features on the ground. And basically the single most important parameter that will dictate many parameters, many performances of the system will be the aperture size. So basic physics, we know that the aperture size will dictate the Rayleigh criteria or the distinction criteria of the system, but it's not all the story. Even if I take a very large telescope, which is very expensive and provides in theory very high resolution or very small point spread function, since for the last several decades we are imaging with digital sensors, with pixels, with discrete pixels, obviously there is a trade-off, basic trade-off that needs to be done between the system, the ability to sample the system with discrete pixels, and the size of the optics. It doesn't make sense to invest too much in a large and high-quality optical telescope if the size of the pixel and the size of your sensor doesn't support that, and vice versa. And typically, this is done with very, I would say, very basic trade-off. Even I would say the fundamental trade-off of Earth observation in the visible range or Earth observation from space, with a parameter which is, we call the Q, with a Q parameter, which is basically tells most of the story in terms of where to put the point, the trade-off between telescope size, optic size, and the pixel and the focal plane array. So we want to be able to put it in a position where we have good imaging, but not over designing the system with respect to the telescope size. So the basic thing would be to balance between the optical resolution that the optics, the diffractions allows, and the pixel and the sensor size. And for that sake, we typically choose a Q which provides good resolution, good contrast, reasonable contrast, but still allows us to see relatively small features. And you can see here in this graph 2 examples where a bad trade-off between the pixel size and the optical telescope size will result in less than optimal image quality. So for example, on the right side, you can see if we put a detector resolution, which is much better than the optics resolution, we'll get a blurry image regardless of how small my pixels are. And on the other side, if we put a very good telescope optical telescope, but we don't support it with sufficiently small pixels, overall we'll have a very discrete image, and we will not extract the best that we can from this system. So this is an example where you see what do I want to do in order to increase the image quality of my system. So let's try to decrease the telescope or the satellite size. So you can see here in this example that I'm trying to decrease the telescope size. I'm trying to improve my resolution by changing Q. So basically you can see that I'm doing it going from a constant GSD and changing the telescope size. And you can see that eventually, if I'm trying to push it on to one edge too much, I will get blurred image. I will lose distinction between the high frequency of my image content. And this is not a good way to improve my system by just trying to change the optics PSF. On the other hand, what will happen if I'm trying to put smaller pixels to a given telescope size? So in this case, obviously, the GSS, which is the point spread function from the optics, remains constant, and I'm putting smaller and smaller pixels. But again, you can see here that at one point, these smaller pixels will not give me more information because the image will be blurred and the high frequency content of my scene will be lost. So basically, this is the most important, I would say, trade-off, because it dictates the size of the telescope, the size of the satellite, the cost of the development or the cost of the satellite, and it's a very critical trade-off. Another critical trade-off, which is impacted by this choice of telescope size and pixel size, is basically the resolution versus the signal-to-noise ratio and the sensitivities to the motion of the satellite. Remember, satellites are moving at 7 kilometers per second on the ground. This is the native natural speed, velocity dictated by physics. So satellites can sometimes point to a limited time and do step and stare. They can slow themselves, but eventually we are talking about a platform which moves very quickly, scanning the Earth. And the same Q, which dictates the image contrast or the quality of the image versus the telescope size, will also dictate the signal-to-noise ratio of the system. And the signal-to-noise ratio will impact, first of all, the ability to have noisy or noiseless images in low lighting conditions. And secondly, it will make my system very sensitive to the motion of the satellite or to its jitter, to its instability. So once I have chosen the resolution and the telescope size and the pixel size, to a very large extent, I have dictated or defined the image quality and the behavior, the dynamic behavior of the system and its impact on the image quality. So to put it, in order to sum up the resolution issue, in order to improve my system resolution, in order to improve the resolution without compensating the SNR, it's not a matter of just putting smaller pixels, and it's not a matter just by increasing the size of the telescope. The only way to do it is to put the telescope size which is most adequate, most compatible with the size of the pixels that you choose. And in that way, you can improve the resolution without making your system too sensitive to SNR reduction and to the dynamic effects of the satellite movement. So I would like to move a little bit. So this is a sum up of the trade-off of the optimization of the Q. Remember, the Q is the number that trade-offs between, let's say, physics or optics through the aperture size, the D, and the wavelength, and the pixel size here, pixel size actually, or the instantaneous field of view of the system. Now, why do we bother to talk so much about the aperture size or the telescope size? Traditionally, primary mirror in large telescope is a very expensive and a very long lead item when you talk about development cycles of Earth observation telescope. You can see here a graph starting in 1992. You can see here what was the basically the density of the mirror, the primary mirror. This is the basic or the major lens of the telescope. What was the areal density of mirrors back in the 90s and up to date? Now, remember, if I want a 1 meter aperture size, okay, I want in the visible range a very high resolution, let's say better than 0.5 meter, 0.3 meter. We are talking about aperture sizes of 80 centimeters, 80, 70, 1 meter. Now, if we take a bulk of mirror and just make a mirror from this bulk of mirror without any treatment, this mirror will typically weight, its mass will be around 100 kilograms. When you are constrained to a satellite of several hundred kilograms, or for a payload which is constrained to be no more than 100, 150 kilograms, you cannot allow yourself to, to manufacture just a primary mirror to be 100 kilograms, because it will take all the mass budget of the full payload. So typically, these mirrors are typically lightweighted, removing about 80% of the mirror, of the blank of the mirror. And for example, today's technology for lightweighting space mirror allows you to come up with, let's say, a 1 meter mirror weighing around 30 kilograms, 30 to 40 kilograms. So this is the technology today, the main technology for traditional space telescopes. And in Israel, we have this capability. El-Ob, Elbit, of course, has this capability to design, manufacture, and test these mirrors and basically provide with very good quality. Remember, these mirrors has to be with very high quality, very, very accurate surface figure. Otherwise, the image quality will be degraded regardless of the size of the telescope or the size of the mirror. So it's a very non-trivial task to manufacture these mirrors. Along the way, technologies has been demonstrated, or I would say investigated, in order to reduce the areal density of mirrors. So the aim is to be able to provide, for example, a mirror with a density of 10 to 15 kilograms per square meter of optical active area, in order to make these mirrors very light and allow to launch very large telescope in a very relatively very low mass. So I would say, I don't know if we will achieve in the future very, very low densities of primary mirrors, such as 1 to 5 kilograms, but I will show shortly new technologies and new approaches that are being adopted in order to overcome the mass constraint of these primary mirrors. Here on the right side, you can see an example of a lightweighted mirror, and you can see this is done with a CNC tooling, specific tooling, in order to remove most of the glass. And the main key here is to be able to maintain the specific stiffness of the mirror, even though you have removed most of its mass. By the way, many people think that the most challenging environment for the primary mirror to survive is the vibration of the launch, but this is a misconception. The most critical requirement for the primary mirror in large aperture telescope is basically gravity. The movement of the exchange from gravity 1G on Earth to space imposes the most strict requirement on the primary mirror design and the design of its mounting to the telescope. Otherwise, the movement from to 0G will distort the mirror and you will lose the image quality. Okay, so up to now, I have discussed mainly spatial resolution. And spatial resolution, typically systems with panchromatic imaging, meaning they collect all of the light in the visible range in one spectral band, provide the highest resolution since you have the highest signal-to-noise ratio, and you can provide very high resolutions. But what about color, spectral resolution? I mean, more colors means a new domain of information. So you not only can manufacture or produce an RGB color image, but you can also distinguish materials by building the spectral signatures. And when you do that, you can do a handful of applications, which a few of them you can see here. For example, environmental monitoring, disaster monitoring. I have mentioned precision agriculture. Some of these applications you can do with 3-4 selected bands, well-known, well-investigated. Sentinel is one of the benchmark satellites which is providing free data for hundreds of publishments and researches done every year in order to exploit spectral data across the Earth. You can perform fire detection, identify oil spills, water quality, bathymetry, measuring the depth of waters near coastal zones. And typically, this is, as I said, gives them much more information and application than just an RGB. Typical system with 3 or 4 bands provide a color image. Typically, these systems has a panchromatic image with a higher resolution, and a process called pan sharpening is performed in order to color the pan image with the colors that were collected, and obviously, eventually, produce a product with a high resolution, with the pan resolution, but colored with the color that you have collected. So another basic trade-off to be done when you are talking about spectral systems is how much energy or how many spectral bands do I need? If I want many spectral bands, because I have a very demanding application in terms of spectral signature identification, I need more colors, or let's say narrow spectral bands. This means less light per band. And this means a lower signal-to-noise ratio for these bands. So I need to compromise something. So whether I compromise the spectral resolution by making the bands wider, meaning less accurate spectral signatures, or I can compromise the spatial resolution. So I increase the pixel footprint on ground, and then I say, okay, my features are not so small, I can do with a lower spatial resolution, but I will preserve the spectral signature that I'm collecting. Obviously, if you are increasing the size of the pixel on ground, at some point, you are getting a new problems, such as spectral mixing. So you will have typically more than one material in a single pixel. So now the real challenge would be, how do I distinguish between spectral signatures of different materials which I collected from a single pixel? So I would say the complexity conservation law remains, and I have to do the trade-off. And again, it all comes to the question, what is the end application that the customer wants in terms of resolution, in terms of the spectral signature that he wants to collect? Does he really want very accurate spectral lines, or can he do with a low resolution? And then obviously I can offer him a higher spatial resolution. More colors require more complex optics in order to disperse the light into all the colors. So typically, filters is the most common knowledge, common known, and I would say straightforward technology to divide the light. But doing very narrow spectral bands with I would say, filters is typically not a trivial task. It brings into the game new challenges, such as crosstalk between the filters, meaning that there is a mix between the bands. So bands are cross-talking into pixels that they weren't supposed to come. So this means that at some point we have to go to other technologies, such as diffraction gratings, prisms, other techniques to disperse the light. And this obviously makes the systems more bulky, more expensive, more complex to test and to prove. So yes, so one of the trade-offs today in the new space arena in terms of spectral or radiometric systems is to try to push more, I would say, simple or more cost-effective solutions and compromise the fidelity, the spectral fidelity of the instrument in order to keep the system within the ballpark of what makes sense in terms of business. And obviously, the SNR and the number of spectral bands will impact the GSD, and you can see here a nice graph which shows you a trade-off between the number of spectral bands, the signal-to-noise ratio, and the GSD of the system. So you cannot basically escape from this triangle of constraint. Now, what I've said now is to a great extent basic physics, right? I mean, physics haven't changed. So these all trade-offs are relevant whether you are building small satellites, large satellites, complex, expensive, or cheap. So, but we all know the phrase, or we all know the buzzword of new space, a new paradigm, that systems has to be within the new space economy, miniaturized, affordable, responsive, commercial.
חברים, לכבות את המיקרופונים.
Commercial. You can see here on the right, basically you all familiar with the revolution that SpaceX and Elon Musk has brought into the space economy with the significant revolutionary disruptive reduction in the cost of space flight or space launches. So you can see here on the graph, for example, if in the 70s, or let's go to even the 90s, the cost of launch of satellites was around thousands of dollars per kilogram. For the last 10 years, the Falcon launches of satellite of SpaceX has reduced the launch cost significantly, bringing it down to a level of $1,000 per kilogram and less. The concept of rideshare, the ability to launch many tens of satellites in a single launch. Yesterday, Transponder 10 mission of SpaceX launched another bunch of satellites into space. And of course, the ability to reuse some stages of the launcher. All of this brought down the cost, or the entrance ticket cost, to the space domain, and obviously to Earth observation. And you can see a nice graph also showing the trend of spatial resolution versus revisit. So in the old days, you had very expensive satellites, $150, $200, $300 million per satellite, providing very high resolution, better than meter, but with a very relatively low revisit of 1 to several days. WorldView 3, ComSat from Korea, Spot, Pléiades, the French satellite, the first Pléiades. So basically, the new space has disrupted this trend in a manner that it basically offers new constellations which are much less expensive to build and launch, providing moderate resolution, let's say around 1 meter to 50 centimeters, but allowing a very high revisit rate, multi-daily, or let's say several times a day by making these large constellations, let's say in a cost model which makes sense to build them and launch them, and not for 7 or 10 years of mission life, but rather for 3 to 5 years, achieving a total mission life by launching multi-satellites and not by making the single satellite very reliable with all the redundancies and the cold redundancies and doubling all the systems and making it very, very expensive. And the question is, of course, a question that was asked in the beginning of this new era: will these two trends coincide? So will we be able to see a converge between new space constellations with their business case and cost model and the legacy old space very high resolution systems which require large telescopes? And this is a good question. We can see a trend of new space companies trying to develop their next gen systems, pushing resolution, trying to push resolution from about 1 meter, 80 centimeters to about 50 centimeters, maybe below, trying to enrich the spectral richness of what they offer. So if they started with panchromatic and RGB or RGB and near IR systems, trying to put hyperspectral new space systems with tens or hundreds of lines, maybe going into the shortwave IR. So this is a nice trend that we can see. But the laws of physics are the same. So even with a very aggressive marketing, you cannot bypass diffraction, and you still need to be able to launch the satellite into space, and you are still limited by the kinematics of orbital physics. And the space environment is still very harsh for electronic components, right? Radiation can kill components, can impose single events, upsets, and even kill electronics and kill the mission. So what do we do, or how do we tackle this in the new space? So basically, the first thing to understand is the customer almost doesn't care about native resolution or native image quality. I have spent 15 years in building the best telescope that optics can provide, because this was the specification that I got from my customer. But the end user is typically more interested in the valuable data that you can extract from these images. So this means that I can trade off between the native image quality that I can design or offer and the post-processing and the AI I can implement on ground in order to extract more data from this image product. So obviously, everybody is familiar with the companies that say that they can provide HD 15 centimeters, although the physics says that they can only give 30 centimeters native because this is what diffraction allows, right? So it's not just marketing, it's the ability to do smart things on ground with the data and extract more data than you can do with the native capabilities. With the progress in sensor technologies, low noise 2D CMOS sensors. So building a traditional very high resolution system in the past typically involved buying a very expensive CCD detector, typically a TDI sensor from the workhorses of CCD sensors for space, whether if it's E2V, Teledyne, Sofradir for other spectral bands, and and very expensive systems. Today, many companies are putting just commercial 2D sensors in space, 60 megapixel, 50 megapixel. There are today's arrays with 150 megapixel, small pixels, and allowing to do this imaging, high resolution imaging with much more cheaper systems. Obviously, you still need to prove that you have some kind of a basic immunity or tolerance to radiation. Otherwise, your system can die after 2 months after launch. But today, I would say that the main approach to do that is to say that I'm putting several systems in orbit. I'm putting maybe several CCDs or CMOS sensors in my systems, but the cost of these systems is measured in tens of thousands of dollars or even thousands of dollars, and not $100,000 as the old legacy sensors. Now, there is a price to this, right? So basically, when you put 2D sensors, you need to image the ground in a step-by-step mode, not in a push broom scanning mode. So this means that the satellite will need to compromise, or the mission will need to compromise the capacity of the images that you are taking, because you need to settle down, stabilize the system, acquire your image, and then go to the next scene that you want to image, in contrary to push broom systems that can scan the ground in 7 kilometers or 5 kilometers per second. But again, you can have a reasonable or decent image collection capacity even with these systems in a fraction of the price of the old legacy systems. Super resolution, one of the techniques that are being exploited in order to extract more than what the physics can give you in the basic product. So I'm putting here 2 examples published in the internet of 2 companies, nice companies, that are trying to implement sub-pixels super resolution, super resolution. One example from KP Labs doing it using AI, so basically training a network and then letting the network to add data into the image, typically comes in the price of artifacts in the image, and preservation of image quality is not trivial. The second example is actually performing sub-pixel scanning of the ground using the instrument in such a way that I'm providing or actually establishing, manufacturing a smaller than pixel scanning of the ground. And if you have accurate enough methods in order to extract the sub-pixel scanning into a super resolved image, you can try to have a higher resolution that was originally possible or feasible with the basic configuration of your system. Another way to bypass the requirement for large telescopes with respect to mass and size is to use sparse aperture. Okay, so we know the James Webb as a very, very exotic and nice example, but this is something that is spoken about and is also explored for the new space market, even from nanosatellites to larger satellites and telescopes. So basically, if I can fold the primary mirror, launch a compact system, and then open it, I can have large telescope within a relatively small envelope that will allow it to be launched in a rideshare mission with a reduced cost. So this is the deployable telescope. Another way is to do actually sparse apertures. So put several telescopes in a constellation of telescope. And if you are building the method in order to, let's say, sum up the signals of this telescope in a coherent manner, you can also resolve an image which is basically with a resolution of the equivalent aperture of the sum of the sub-aperture that you have. It's not so easy. You have to bypass several challenges of a coherent image summing and the gaps between the sub-apertures. But this is another way in order to extract more than, I would say, the brute force method of a single monolithic large system. Last slide, I think, is about revisit. So revisit, we can put satellites in different inclinations, whether if it's SSO, which will provide you good lighting conditions in the area of interest, but a relatively lower revisit with inclined satellites, which will provide you higher revisit, but will not cover the full globe, and can meet the area of interest in different lighting, different hours of the day. But the combination of these two, or these orbits, can optimize a specific mission between the revisit and the resolution and the lighting condition. And this is something which is very important. For example, if you want to do radiometric mission, hyperspectral mission, it's very important to try to image the area of interest in the same lighting conditions with the same reflections of light from the ground. Otherwise, you will have troubles in calibrating the image and extracting the impact of the atmosphere on the spectral signature that you are trying to restore. So you don't have the freedom to put the satellites in all feasible orbits, but there is still a degree of freedom to design the mission and to try to optimize some of the parameters based on the constellation. And the last slide, I think, is about the harsh environment of space. So we know radiation can kill components. So the traditional way is to do radiation campaigns and to take the wafers and take only components which are minimum 10 kilorads SI radiation immune, and to send components to accelerators where you bomb them with heavy ions, energetic protons, and use only this. This is very expensive, very time-consuming. Other ways is to take commercial components, maybe build protection circuits, protection mechanism in order to avoid catastrophic failure of the mission, for example, catastrophic latch-up. If you're using commercial off-the-shelf systems, you can put two systems, double the card, but double the computer, without exploding the cost of the system, but providing some kind of redundancy to the system. And most important, I think, is to aim to a less aggressive requirement of mission life. So there is a step function. If you want 5, 6, 7 years in orbit, this is another level of immunity of electronics. If you can do it 2 to 3 years, you can put, in many cases, industrial components, maybe military-grade components. But remember, if you have a low-cost constellation, you really don't need a 7-year satellite in order to provide a 7-year mission life. Okay, so you can't have it all. We know that from school, and you can't bypass physics, even if you have a very strong marketing. But the main thing here is to try to aim the trade-off of the engineering system, the trade-offs that you're doing to what the customer really needs. And if you understand exactly what it needs in terms of all the parameters that I just explained, the chance that you will not, on one hand, over-design your system, impose costs that the customer will not be able to bear, and on the other side, will impose on you a design which will not meet the requirements of the end user, these chances, of course, will be lower, and you will get a nice and cost-effective systems. And as the technology moves forward, we have more tools in order to make this work in terms of engineering and in terms of the economy of the new space. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, Aryeh, thank you very much. Now the time for you, the audience, to ask questions. So please.
I have a question. Thank you, Aryeh, for your enlightening lecture. It was very, very interesting. I have a question regarding increasing resolution by using revisit information, which means try to register information from visit to visit in order to increase resolution. Is it possible, do you think?
Yeah, basically, in principle, if you are scanning a specific area with multiple satellites in a time frame which is, let's say, approximately close to, I would say, real time in terms of the dynamics of the image, obviously, typically you will have naturally sub-pixel scanning of the ground, because each time you will sample the area of interest slightly differently. So I assume that if you have a train of images of the same scene taken in very close proximity, some image processing can be done in order to extract higher than basic pixel size resolution. The question will be, what will be the time frame to do that? And the registration of the images will be something that needs to be addressed before you can try to expect super resolution. But in principle, yes, it can work.
Now is the time to insert artificial intelligence to this registration.
Yes, so AI is, as probably everybody knows, not only in space, but also in space, is a buzzword that extracts a lot of attention. Not only, by the way, AI on the ground, but also there are missions today that are trying to demonstrate the ability to perform AI in the satellite itself. So imagine a satellite that collects data, images, but it doesn't download the data itself, the images itself. It performs AI on the satellites and basically can download only the valuable data to the user. For example, if you are trying to identify features, you can download their coordinates. If you are trying to detect fires and you detected using your AI in the satellite a location of fire, you can download immediately, and let's say an alarm message together with the coordinates. No need to download the amount of data. So yes, AI is something which is strongly being explored today with respect to space and specifically to Earth observation.
Aryeh, I have a question for you. Do you consider using a metric detector instead of the line detectors?
A metric detector?
Right. Two-dimensional.
Yes, so basically, as I said, many of the new space systems today in the market are using 2D cameras instead of a line camera. These systems are typically much less expensive than typical line array TDI sensors. Also, remember that when you have a line scanning camera, the satellite needs to be very accurate or relatively accurate in its scanning accuracy in order not to smear the image that you are building during the sweep. So yes, there are commercially systems available today with 2D CMOS sensors. The price that you pay is mainly the capacity of area that you can cover with these systems, since, as I explained, it's a much slower method of scanning than push broom.
Any more questions, gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen? All right, so I would like to thank you again. A very good lecture, interesting.
Thank you.
And hope to see you sometimes in the near future.
Yes, thank you. I also expect to see you, and thank you all for listening and attending this talk today. It was my pleasure, and see you only in happy occasions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to hear you.
Thank you very much. It was my pleasure. Thank you.